Now, what we have here is an excerpt from the Papyrus of Unefer, which is another primary source that contains the origin of the term Afurakan, Africa, which you can actually find located in chapter 17, section 5, at the bottom of the first column and top right of the second column. And by the way, the two columns containing the origin of the term is what you see here, isolated on our right. So here you're looking at the actual transliteration of the term Afurakan from the Unefer Sheft, the Papyrus of Unefer, which dates back approximately 3,300 years ago, which of course predates any white Eurasian reference to the term anywhere. Nonetheless, to make the two columns containing the term easier to read, the Medutu, the hieroglyphs of the term, is actually placed from right to left. So you're witnessing the actual transliteration of the term Afurakan, which is rendered Afurakaka in the Papyrus of Ani. Yes, this is the same text found in the same chapter 17 in both versions of the Runu Per Emheru we've been discussing and demonstrating throughout this particular segment. So again, in this particular source, the Papyrus of Unefer, it has the Ka of Afuraka, while in the Papyrus of Ani, it has the Kaka of Afurakaka, and Afurakant in the Shat Mchuwat, the book of the underworld, spirit world. So this is not just us using our imagination, trying to put fragments of little words from here and there together to combine or make up the term. As you can see, the actual term is found literally in a number of primary documents, and as we've demonstrated throughout part 5, 6, and now here in part 7 of our series, the term has an actual cosmological foundation, which of course references Ra as the creator establishing the first landmass above the surface of the water at the beginning of creation. So here's our last primary source, which is rendered and transliterated Ahuaca from the Temple of Aset in Paraka, which is another variation of the term dating back 2,400 years ago. So now that we proved and demonstrated conclusively our primary sources containing the origin of the term Afurakan, Africa, what we're going to be doing from here on is showcasing the portions of our ancient Nile Valley cosmology they corrupted to manufacture their Israelite myth. So this part of our series, we'll be delving all the way into the Afurakan African origins of the Israelite myth by going into the cosmological stories of actual deities, divine forces in creation they corrupted the divine functions and titles of to create their fictional narrative about them being a chosen people who brought civilization and divine order to the world. So this is what the following segments of our series will entail. So, the following video is a short video clip from the documentary we first showed in part 2 of our series, which will be an introduction to the royal family of divinities from our ancient Nile Valley civilizations, which of course still animates and governs the various groups among our people to this very day, including those of us in the Western Hemisphere that descend from these particular groups during the transatlantic slave trade. So the video clip again will be an introduction to what we will be elaborating on and clarifying even further in honor of Nokwade as we move forward.
Within the African systems, be they in Kemet, be they in Nubia, or be they in Kush, the male god has an equal and opposite female god. We see this representation in all African cultural systems that flow.
Every Netcher in Kemet had his female counterpart. So I reference Asar and Aset. They were Netcher who complemented each other. They were co-equals.
They are usually together in families, producing children. We have a man and a woman and a child produced as the union.
We tend to think of the deities as a family. It's not quite so biological, it's more religious.
In the beginning there was only noon, the original ocean of chaos that contained the beginning of everything to come. Ra, the sun, was born and appeared to rise from the surface of the water. Ra then gave birth to 2 children, Shu, the god of air, and Tefnut, the goddess of moisture. Shu and Tefnut then had 2 more children, Nut, the goddess of sky, and Geb, the god of earth. And so with them the physical universe was created. From the union of Geb and Nut, 4 human children were born, and so the story of civilization begun.
The Egyptian creation story, in many respects, represents the development of a civilization and the growing of Egypt, I suppose. And it's coming out of something that's very simple and coming out of nature, and then is being developed by man and being developed also into obviously one of the greatest civilizations that there ever was.
The spiritual world represented the physical world. So as it was in heaven, so as it was on earth. The Africans came together in Kemet to build a heaven on earth.
So what you see is this combination of balance and harmony. The essence of what we find within traditional African society is an understanding of the totality of life that is literally matrilineal and is paired with the masculine energy in order to maintain its force and its operation throughout society. If you suppress the female, you suppress 50% of the power of the creator.
It seems to be really important, and in many respects the sort of male and female seem to represent the 2 different forces coming together. And I suppose it's a bit like the unification of Upper and Lower Egypt in some respects.
Because they understood that it wasn't just about gender. It was about the understanding of the energy and how it moves, how masculine energy moves and how feminine energy moves, and how to marry the 2, which created balance, life.
The idea was to create a land which was like the land that was up in the skies and beneath the earth. And in that sense, they saw that how they were arranged in families was also how the gods must also be arranged in families, and how the spiritual energies of the universe must also be arranged in families because they are arranged in families.
3 of the most important Neteru in Kemet were Asar, Aset, and Heru.
Or to give them the more usual names, Osiris, Isis, and Horus. These 3 deities originally came from Kush.
These are very, very important triumvirate.
Three of the most important Neteru in Kemet were Asar, Aset, and Heru.
Or to give them the more usual names, Osiris, Isis, and Horus. These three deities originally came from Cush.
These are very, very important triumvirate.
Their stories are as much mythology as they are history.
Now, according to Diodorus Siculus, who was one of the ancient Greek historians, Osiris was originally a community leader of very early Cush. He doesn't call him a king of Cush, but he makes it quite clear he was a leader.
Asar is regarded as the founding father of Kemet. He unified the two lands. He established the first nation-state in the recorded history of humanity. He is said to have introduced writing, the writing which the ancient Kemites referred to as Medu Neter, or the writing of God when it was written, or the words of God when it was spoken. He is also said to have introduced agriculture and theology.
Also decided to take civilization to certain parts of the Nile Valley as well as to other parts of the world.
Asar married a beautiful Nubian woman by the name of Aset, who was his co-regent, not his inferior, his co-regent. And when Asar decided that he was going to travel to other parts of Africa to share his technology with his brothers and sisters on the continent, he left his wife Aset to run their nation.
And he was very successful, very admired, and this provoked the jealousy of his brother, Set.
And Set then plotted to overthrow his brother Asar.
Set, or Sete in ancient Egyptians, murdered his brother, dismembered his body into 14 pieces, and then scattered those 14 pieces throughout Kemet.
When Aset learned of the murder and dismemberment of her husband, she fled for her life, and then she went searching for the missing parts of her husband's body. Aset found 13 of the 14 parts of Asar's body, and as she found each body part, she cleaned it, she anointed it with oils, and she laid all 13 parts out, and she literally remembered her husband, wrapped his entire body in bandages, and created the first mummy in the recorded history of humanity. As Aset was preparing to bury her husband, she grieved because she was about to bury the man that she loved. She grieved because she was still a virgin. They had never consummated their marriage, and thus she would never bear children by the man that she loved. And according to the story written on many papyri in Kemet, carved on several temples in Kemet, the spirit of Asar came and impregnated his virgin wife Aset. And then 9 months later, the virgin Aset gave birth to their son Heru.
Now, in the case of Isis, or Set, she is the original Virgin Mother, and she is seen suckling Horus. He is shown as a child suckling his mother, and he's wearing the pharaonic headdress, making it clear that he was born a king.
Heru is the son of Osiris, and he's the embodiment of order. He has to take over the kingship, and he has to do that through a struggle.
So Heru was born, the son of a virgin. He was born with a specific purpose in life. That was to restore his father's kingdom, to do battle with his uncle Set and reclaim his father's throne.
Heru would then take up his father's struggle, in a way, against his uncle Set.
One of those classic battles, not so much between good and evil, it's more a battle between order and anarchy.
And Heru eventually triumphs over Set.
At that moment, Heru was transformed, miraculously transformed into a falcon. He flew into heaven to meet with his father Asar, told Asar of his victory over Set. His father blessed him, and Heru then returned to Kemet as the legitimate heir to the throne. And when he ascended to the throne, the symbol of the Heru Badet, the winged sun disk, was a symbol that was carved above the entrance of every temple in Kemet to serve as a reminder of Heru fulfilling the reasons for which he was born. And at the moment Heru reclaimed his father's throne, and was crowned the king of Kemet, his father Asar was resurrected from the dead and took his place on the throne of judgment. And at the moment Heru reclaimed his father's throne and was crowned the king of Kemet, his father Asar was resurrected from the dead and took his place on the throne of judgment.
And with that said, who's Asar and Aset? Now, since we kind of already touched on the divinity Heru, which of course we're going to continue to build on as well, what we're going to do now, however, is focus mainly on Asar and Aset, who's the mother and father of this particular royal family of divinities. So, Asar and Aset originated in ancient Kant, Kanit, Nubia, modern-day Sudan, South Sudan, Ethiopia, etc. In ancient Kemet, Asar was also called Kenti Amenchu, Kaniti Amenchu, one of his many titles, meaning first, foremost, head, or chief, Kant, of those in the West, Ament. So once again, you're witnessing the term Kant in the title Kaniti Amenchu, which is often translated as either foremost, first, head, or chief, Kant, and Ament, which in this case means west. And suffice to say, this particular title of Asar, Kaniti Amenchu, or Kaniti Amenti, not only references our ancient Nile Valley cosmology and civilizations, but due to the cyclical nature of our ancient cosmology, who continues to play out within our ethnic groups, clans, and families to this very day, also, of course, references those of us in the Western Hemisphere as well. Those of us who died physically and spiritually during the transatlantic slave trade, yet began to purify and will continue to purify and totally liberate ourselves, thus resurrecting and uniting our respective nations within the collective body of Asar. Yes, who was killed and scattered after being forced into the Western Hemisphere during the transatlantic slave trade by the wicked and jealous brother Set. So, we're going to continue. As a part of a royal triad of divinities, Asar and Aset was appointed king and queen by the creator Ra in our ancient Nile Valley cosmology. As such, Asar and Aset governs the divine functions of leadership, rulership. Asar and Aset also established Nile Valley civilization and found a colony and state of ancient Kemet, later taking civilization and laws to other parts of Afurakan and the world. Asar was also called Kam-Ur, which means the great black one in ancient Kemet, another one of his many titles, while Aset was called Kam-Urt. Asar is usually depicted with black skin and sometimes green skin, with black and green referencing the black soil, fertility, vegetation, and black-skinned people of ancient Kemet.
So we see this here in the pyramid text. The pyramid text, this is the first sacred text in the history of the entire world before Bible, Torah, Quran, or anything else. So I said, let me go to the first major corpus written by Africans in Kemet. And this is exactly where I saw it, where you see Kemet, Kemetiu. So this is a translation by J.P. Allen. He says, you stand at the fore of those of black land as the apis. The apis was a bull, a black bull that had various marks to show that it was divine. Now, you notice that he'll translate this as black land, but he refuses to translate it as land of black people. And we're talking about this in 2332 to 2287 during the reign of Meri Pepi. And he says black land, this is a term for cultivable soil along the banks of the Nile and in the delta, where most of Egypt's population lived, hence the name for Egypt itself. So what you find is, by and large, white scholars, they like to say, oh, they're only talking about the land. They're not talking about the people. The people aren't black. Only the soil is black. And generally, this was something that was actually crushed in the 1974 UNESCO conference where Sheikh Anta Diop and Theophile Obenga brought in an overwhelming amount of evidence. So they won that battle. However, we may not have continued to win the peace because they go still saying these things. Now, when they talk about the black land, one thing that they forget is that the people themselves say that they were made out of that black soil. All right, so in the worldview of the people of Kemet, if you want to say it only refers to the land as being black, what you find is that they said that Khnum, right, the divinity here, would mold people out of this black soil on this potter's wheel. So even though they're trying to get away from the people being black, they've kind of painted themselves into a corner, because even if you say it's the black soil is what we say that we're made of. So another hymn to Khnum Re, God of the potter's wheel, who settled the land by his handiwork, as we see here, formed all on his potter's wheel, Taitenin, who made all that is on their soil. This is following a translation by Litton. However, we know that when we're talking about, just as we said, the black mud, you can find this in the Ebers Papyrus. And this is another reason why it's necessary for us to read this language ourselves, because otherwise you are beholden to those who know the language. And this is another reason why it's necessary for us to read this language ourselves, because otherwise you are beholden to those who know the language. And this is another reason why it's necessary for us to read this language ourselves, because otherwise you are beholden to those who know the language. So here you see in the original hieratic, here you see Amat, Kemet. Now, here we have a transcription by Brzezinski where you see he has this one wrong. He has this as a new bowl, right? So he's mistaken this hieratic for this one, and this is what it actually is. So we see black mud, so mud, and then the adjective is coming after. So basically what we're getting at is that if you don't know the language, you would just see this and say, oh, it must be right. But when you know it yourself, then you can actually see that sometimes it's intentional that they're telling you it's only black soil. Other times it's just, perhaps we could say, incompetence. But we continue. And what we saw there was this black mud of the Nile. This is a Nile crocodile, right? And here we see charcoal, and what the white scholars say is, no, this is a crocodile. These are crocodile scales. Again, a crocodile that's in the black mud. But we continue. Here we see this same line here from the pyramid text, where we see Ahak, which is stand you, Kent, which is front, commit you. This is black, and then the T is letting you know it's talking about people, but it has a determinative of a village with crossroads to let you know it's talking about those who are of that land. And then Hapu East, Apis Lek. So again, we're talking about the land of black people, but they prefer to translate it as Kemet. Now, how did the people depict themselves? You see this term Remech as man or mankind. They translate it as Egyptians and so forth and so on, mankind. So you would wonder, well, how do they depict themselves as Remech? And this is a photograph from the tomb of Ramesses III. So a photograph that shows exactly here. So here, just as you saw in the dictionary entry, you see the Remech, and then man, woman, and then plural. And this is how they depict themselves. Here again, you see Remech, right? So it's not even up for debate that these people saw themselves as black and depicted themselves as such. Now this is a reproduction from that same tomb, where here again you see Remech as this type. Then interestingly, you see Nehesi, which are the Nubians. And these are the ones who the white scholars are willing to say, all right, those are black people. However, when you approach the text itself, you see that they depict the Nubians, the black people, just as they depict themselves. And they have two different types of Nubians, right? Both of them being black. And then two different types of Remech, both of them being black. So we see a whole range of black people in terms of complexion here in this conference hall. So we see some who are of this color, right? We see some who are of this color. That's Nanaya, right? So when we see this doesn't mean that those people are not black and these people are, or vice versa. It's the same thing that we're dealing with today. So we have the Remechs, the people of Kemet. You have the Amu. These are the Asiatics, as they're called, Eurasians as we prefer. The Nehesi, these are the Nubians, and then the Chambu, which are those who had come out of Eurasia and had invaded the Nile Valley and North Africa by that time. That's the Gaddafi type. Now, interestingly enough, we see here, again, Nubians depicted the same as the Remech, the people of Kemet. So here it says, Medut, Jedut, Nehesi, and Punt. So these are the words spoken by a Nubian of Punt. When we're talking about Punt, this is the area associated with modern-day Eritrea, Somalia, so forth and so on. So here you see him depicted the same as all the other people of the land of the blacks. And then interestingly enough as well, we see here the Achiampoma. These are what we would refer to in modern days as the linguist staffs. So you can see Adriana, you can see Egwana, you can see Oyokwo. They're carrying the staff just as they still do to this very day. And each one signifies the clan that they're representing. And then interestingly enough as well, we see here the Achiampoma. These are what we would refer to in modern days as the linguist staffs. So you can see Adriana, you can see Egwana, you can see Oyokwo. They're carrying the staff just as they still do to this very day. And each one signifies the clan that they're representing. about the land of black people, but they prefer to translate it as Kemet. Now, how did the people depict themselves? You see this term Remech as man or mankind. They translate it as Egyptians and so forth and so on, mankind. So you would wonder, well, how do they depict themselves as Remech? And this is a photograph from the tomb of Ramesses III. So a photograph that shows exactly here. So here, just as we saw in the dictionary entry, you see the Remech, and then man, woman, and then plural. And this is how they depict themselves. Here again, you see Remech, right? So it's not even up for debate that these people saw themselves as black and depicted themselves as such. Now this is a reproduction from that same tomb, where here again you see Remech as this type. Then interestingly you see Nehesi, which are the Nubians. And these are the ones who the white scholars are willing to say, all right, those are black people. However, when you approach the text itself, you see that they depict the Nubians, the black people, just as they depict themselves. And they have two different types of Nubians, right? Both of them being black. And then two different types of Remech, both of them being black. So we see a whole range of black people in terms of complexion here in this conference hall. So we see some who are of this color, right? We see some who are of this color. That's Nanaya, right? So when we see this, this doesn't mean that those people are not black and these people are, or vice versa. It's the same thing that we're dealing with today. So we have the Remech, these are the people of Kemet. You have the Amu. These are the Asiatics, as they're called, Eurasians as we prefer. The Nehesi, these are the Nubians, and then the Champu, which are those who had come out of Eurasia and had invaded the Nile Valley and North Africa by that time. That's the Gaddafi type. Now, interestingly enough, we see here, again, Nubians depicted the same as the Ramech, the people of Kemet. So here it says, Jedut, Medut, Jedut, Nehasi, and Punt. So these are the words spoken by a Nubian of Punt. We're talking about Punt. This is the area associated with modern-day Eritrea, Somalia, so forth and so on. So here you see him depicted the same as all the other people of the land of the blacks. And then interestingly enough as well, we see here the Achiampoma. These are what we would refer to in modern days as the linguist staffs. So you can see Adriana, you can see Ekwana, you can see Oyokwo. They're carrying the staff just as they still do to this very day. And each one signifies the clan that they're representing. Now again, we have Litan, who has translations that many follow. And here you see Kemet here with a man and a woman determinative. Kemet, man and woman determinative. However, she translates it as he came and ruled the black land. But we don't have the determinative for a village with crossroads here. We have a man and a woman. This should be translated as he came and ruled the black people, right? He came and nourished the black land. Again, we don't have land here. We have a determinative of people. Now, if you don't know the language, you would just say, oh, black land is soil, blah, blah, blah. But that's not what our ancestors wrote down. They wrote that they are black people, right? And she has here, the contrast with red land makes it desirable to translate Kemet as black land rather than conventional Egypt, whereas really it should not be translated as either, but we continue. And just as we saw there, Kemet, in the dictionary by Faulkner, Concise Dictionary, he has this translated as Egyptians. The best translation would be black people, or just leave it as Kemet or Kemetiu. When you have a determinative as a crossroads here in the circle, then that's when you're talking about the land of the black people, right? But that's not what we saw, but we see an intentional misguiding, right? And then Kim, the concept itself, material is this, black with a hair determinative, and then also with an abstract determinative lets you know the concept of blackness. Now, this is coming back to Sheikh Anta Diop and Theophile Obenga, where they said that Egyptians had only one term to designate themselves, Kemet, the Negroes literally. This is the strongest term existing in the Pharaonic tongue to indicate blackness. And then he goes on, there's a remarkable circumstance that the ancient Egyptians should never have had the idea of applying these qualificatives to the Nubians and other populations of Africa to distinguish them from themselves. The Egyptians used the expression Nahas to designate the Nubians, and Nahas is the name of a people with no color connotation in Egyptian. So
Yah, Yah, Jah, Ah, the Egyptian moon god. Ea, Jah, as cited from Wikipedia, the Free Dictionary. Ea is a god of the moon in ancient Egyptian religion, and his name, sometimes transliterated as Yah, Jah, or Ah, simply means moon. Nevertheless, by the New Kingdom he was less prominent as a moon deity than the other gods with lunar connections, Thoth and Khonsu. As a result of the functional connection between them, he could be identified with either of those deities. Thoth, from Wikipedia, the Free Encyclopedia. Thoth. From Greek, from Egyptian Tahuti, perhaps pronounced Jehudi, from Egyptian Tahuti, perhaps pronounced Jehudi, from Egyptian Tahuti, perhaps pronounced Jehudi, was considered one of the more important deities of the Egyptian pantheon. In art, he was often depicted as a man with the head of an ibis, or a baboon, animals sacred to him. His feminine counterpart was Seshat, and his wife was Mayat. In addition, Thoth was also known by specific aspects of himself, for instance, the moon god, Ea, Jehudi, the moon god, Ea, Jehudi, the moon god, Ea, Jehudi. In addition, Thoth was also known by specific aspects of himself, for instance, the moon god, Ea, Jehudi, representing the moon for the entire month, or as Jedneter, godfather. The Greeks related Thoth to their god Hermes, due to his similar attributes and functions. One of Thoth's titles, 3 times great, was translated to the Greek, Trismegistos, making Hermes Trismegistus. Khonsu, alternately Chonsu, Khensu, Khons, Chons or Khonshu, is an ancient Egyptian god, whose main role was associated with the moon. His name means traveler, and this may relate to the nightly travel of the moon across the sky. Along with Thoth, he marked the passage of time. Khonsu was instrumental in the creation of new life in all living creatures. At Thebes he formed part of a family triad, with Mut as his mother and Amun, his father. At Kom-Ombo, he was worshipped as son of Sobek and Hathor. From E. A. Wallace Budge's Hieroglyphic Dictionary, Khonsu Tahuti, also, Khonsu Jehudi, a form of the moon god of Edfu. With the title twice great, this god was worshipped at Hermopolis. Khonsu, Nefer, Hetep, Tahuti, the Theban god of Khonsu Thoth, from E. A. Wallace Budge's Hieroglyphic Dictionary. Ea, also known as Ah, or Khonsu, also known as Khonsu, the moon god, Tahuti, Thoth, Aset Ah, also known as Aset Ea, also known as Aset Ea, also known as Aset Ea, Aset Ah, also known as Aset Ea, Aset Ah, also known as Aset Ea, seat of the moon, in effect, the capital of the oasis of Chest, Dakla. Ani, was an ancient form of the sun god, and moon god, who is said to be the president of the company of gods. I am one of those gods. Hail when shining from the moon, cometh forth Osiris Ani, this among thy multitude. Ani, a form of Osiris, the moon god. Ani, a form of Osiris, the moon god. Asera, also known as Osir, Ea, also known as Osir, Ea, also known as Osir, Ea, Osiris the moon. The following depictions are from several hieroglyphic dictionaries, and one website for the characters contained in the Egyptian name for the moon god, and also for the moon, Yah.
ויחלום עוד חלום אחר, ויספר אותו לאחיו, ויאמר, הנה חלמתי חלום עוד, והנה השמש והירח, ו11 כוכבים משתחווים לי. If
the name of the Egyptian god, Ea, is not the name of the Israelite/Hebrew God, then try to explain why Yah is attached to so many Israelite/Hebrew names, such as Abia, Adaiah, Isaiah, Aya, Amariah, Amaziah, Anah, Asahiah, Isaiah, Athaiah, Athaliah, Azariah, Azaziah, Badiah, Benaiah, Berechiah, Beriah, Berechiah, Bithiah, Bechiah, Conaniah, Cononia, Daliah, Daliah, Eliah, Gedaliah, Gemariah, Hobaiah, Habaziniah, Hatchaliah, Haggiah, Honaniah, Hardiah, Hasadiah, Hashabiah, Hashabniah, Haziah, Hezekiah, Hilkiah, Hodiah, Hodaviah, Hoshea, Igdaliah, Isaiah, Isaiah, Ismachiah, Ishmaiah, Ismaiah, Ishiah, Izrahiah, Jozaniah, Jehaziah, Jeberechiah, Jechemiah, Jeconiah, Jedaiah, Jedediah, Jediah, Jehiah, Jehiskiah, Jechemiah, Jeremiah, Jeriah, Jeshiah, Jeshiah, Jesiah, Jesniah, Josiah, Jezrehiah, Josiah, Josabiah, Josephiah, Kaliah, Koliah, Kashiah, Masa, Messiah, Malchiah, Mataniah, Matrithiah, Melchiah, Meshelemiah, Micaiah, Michaiah, Micniah, Bariah, Nariah, Nedabiah, Nehemiah, Nariah, Nathaniah, Nodiah, Obadiah, Pedaiah, Pekahiah, Peliah, Pelatiah, Pethahiah, Remiah, Reol, Rehabiah, Raliah, Rephaiah, Semachiah, Sariah, Shemariah, Shariah, Shebaniah, Shekaniah, Shechaniah, Shelemiah, Shemaiah, Shemariah, Shephatiah, Sherebiah, Sherebiah, Tobiah, Uriah, Uzziah, Zebadiah, Zechariah, Zedekiah, Zephaniah.